In fact, it has been found that their value systems, their social values, were essentially based on equality, altruism, and sharing. And they literally forbid upstartism, dominance and aggression, and egoism. We know this today because of anthropological research done on remaining hunter-gatherer societies around the world, such as the pt.3, which is how it's pronunciated, out of Brazil. Amazingly, it appears that well over, and this is an important point, for anyone that tells you that the current system is natural, for well over 90% of the human being's existence, human species' existence, on this planet as we know it, we were within social organizations that did not use money, that did not have hierarchy, and they even had counter-dominance strategies where the majority would work together to shut down any individual that was trying to gain power and control. Pretty much a reverse of what we have today. The Neolithic Revolution changed all of that. It provided human beings with an ability to control their environment more intently. The sustenance of life could now be cultivated essentially at will. Now, while this advent would appear as a profound benefit to all, it also introduced some pesky social problems as a result of conditioning attributes which we still deal with today. In the view of anthropologist and professor of neurology at Stanford University, Dr. Robert Sapolsky, hunter-gatherers have thousands of wild sources of food to subsist on. Agriculture changed all of that, generating an overwhelming reliance on a few dozen food sources. Agriculture allowed for the stockpiling of surplus resources and thus, inevitably, the unequal stockpiling of them, stratification of society, and the invention of classes. Thus, it has allowed for the invention of poverty. Since this dramatic change in the structure of human society, the creation of imbalances has continued, and social stratification and income inequality are now staples of the modern world, as we all know. In fact, many who are unfamiliar with human history would probably consider these attributes, again, to be part of some natural human order. It's so pervasive today. We have gone from food cultivation to commodity bartering to gold exchange to metal-backed certificate exchange to fiat currency. We went from a system with values reflective of true natural processes to a system of values based on certificates of ownership traded for income on their own, virtually, or I would say not even virtually, completely decoupled from physical resources. And we have come from a world based on necessity and social drive for preservation and sustainability to a world based on strategic manipulation, pointless materialism, and an obsession with property and ownership. In the words of historian, philosopher David Hume, the first man who, after enclosing a piece of ground, took it into his head to say, "This is mine," and found people simple enough to believe him, was the real founder of civil society. How many crimes, how many wars, how many murders, how many misfortunes and horrors would that man have saved the species who, pulling up stakes, or filling up the ditches, should have cried to his fellows, "Beware of listening to this impostor. You are lost if you forget that the fruits of the earth belong to us all, and the earth itself to nobody." Moreover, scarcity is now a driving force for commerce. In our system, scarcity equals profit. The less there is of something, the more it can be valued in terms of money. In other words, abundance is a negative thing in the profit system. In the words of anthropologist Marshall Shallens, the market industrial system institutes scarcity in a manner completely unparalleled and to a degree nowhere else approximated, where production and distribution are arranged through the behavior of prices and all livelihoods depend on getting and spending. Insufficiency of material means becomes the explicit, calculable starting point of all economic activity. Likewise, I would like to point out as a simple aside that the money supply in America at all times has less in value than the outstanding transactions required. In other words, There isn't and never will be in the American money supply or most other money supplies on the planet enough money in existence at any one time to cover the outstanding transactions within the economy. Money is created out of debt through loans, and interest is charged for those loans, whether it is a government bond or a personal home equity loan. If every single debt was called in right now in our economy, there would be an enormous amount of money that is literally impossible to pay back in domestic currency. This is a central reason why stratification and inequality is literally built into our system. The inherent scarcity of the money supply itself, imagine that. In this system, bankruptcy isn't some irregular byproduct that negligent people just happen to stumble into. It is an inevitable built-in attribute. It's a game of musical chairs. I hope that's clear. In the words of economist Bernard Lietaer, a great quote, "Greed and competition are not the result of a mutable human temperament. Greed and fear of scarcity are, in fact, being continuously created and amplified as a direct result of the kind of money we are using. We can produce more than enough food to feed everybody, but there is clearly not enough money to pay for it all. The scarcity is in our national currencies. In fact, the job of the central banks is to create and maintain that scarcity. The direct consequence is that we have to fight with each other in order to survive." That last sentence really defines so much. The direct consequence is that we have to fight with each other in order to survive. The consequence of these mechanisms is, again, extreme social imbalance and hence social stratification. With this understood, let's now consider the state of income inequality within the world. In 2005, the jolly folks at Citigroup put out a memo to its wealthiest clients in regard to the state of what they called the plutonomy. In the opening summary on this is very, very clear. The world is divided into two blocks, the plutonomy and the rest. The US, the UK, and Canada are the key plutonomies, economies powered by the wealthy. The plutonomy is defined as a society where the majority of the wealth is, of course, controlled by an ever-shrinking minority. And as such, the economic growth of that society becomes dependent on the fortunes of the wealthy minority and not the rest of the people. Keep that in mind. They then go to ask the question, what are the drivers of plutonomy? They state destructive technology, driven productivity gains, creative financial innovation, capitalist-friendly cooperative governments, an international dimension of immigrants and overseas conquests invigorating wealth creation, slave labor, the rule of law, and patenting inventions. Often these wealth waves involve great complexity, exploited best by the rich and educated of the time. The basic point of this document is the understanding that the average consumer is essentially meaningless to the equity markets. For the super wealthy, trading amongst themselves account for the state of the economy overall. They state, in a plutonomy, there is no such animal as the US consumer or the UK consumer or indeed the Russian consumer. There are rich consumers, few in number, but disproportionate in the gigantic slice of income and consumption they take. There are the rest, the non-rich, the multitudinous many, but only accounting for surprisingly small bites of the national pie. They continue. This is why, for example, we worry less about the impact of high oil prices on aggregate consumption. Clearly, high oil prices are a burden for most parts of our communities. However, without making any moral judgment, income inequality being what it is just makes this group less relevant to the aggregate data. The conclusion, we should worry less about the average consumer, say the 50th percentile, what they're doing, when that consumer is, we think, less relevant to the aggregate data than how the wealthy feel and what they are doing. This is simply a case of mathematics, not morality. You got to hand it to him for being honest.